Hello, one and all, and welcome to the latest edition of the Hammer Territory podcast. It is me and Stephen Tolbert back in the saddle. It's been a few weeks since we have been, together on a regular show, but it's good to be with you once again. And it was a pretty active day, an exciting day, as we got to see some names that was some people that we have been wanting to see for quite a while. And those people said some interesting things into microphones. And we're going to get into what Alex Anthopoulos in particular had to say in spring training started. Stephen, before we get into that, always a pleasure to see you, sir. How are you today?
Shawn, what's up, brother? Yeah, it's good to be on with you, man. I decided to wear the Braves hat today. We had the one guy in the YouTube comments who was very mad that I had a Brewers hat on. I thought about wearing it again just to double down, but we went Braves today just because, spring training has started. We've got pitchers and catchers have reported. A lot of the position players are already there. It's kind of become a regular thing. Very few players actually report the day that players are supposed to report. They come the same day or sometimes earlier than the pitchers and catchers show up. So most of the players are in camp already doing batting practice, doing interviews. Obviously, Alex Anthopoulos gave a kind of a big interview right at the start of camp. And that's going to be the focus of today's show because he had some interesting things to say.
Yeah, absolutely did. And we'll kind of go in a bit of the order of what Alex Anthopoulos had to discuss, mainly hitting on a few topics. Before we get into the main topic, which, will be, some interesting comments that he had in terms of how the offseason progressed. And, obviously, the big question on everybody's mind is, payroll. And we've talked about that at length on this show in weeks past. But let's first start with the beginning of the interview, Stephen, where he talked about Ronald Acuna Jr. and Spencer Strider. And of course, Ronald Acuna Jr. himself spoke. It was good to see Ronald in action, good to see Ronald, engaged, and you could tell that he was ready to get going once again. And overall, a positive report. But the big thing from Alex Anthopoulos was that really nothing had changed. Ronald is not going to play in any of the spring training games. He's going to do plenty of work, basically on the backfields, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. But the Braves are basically going to keep tabs on how he's doing, and he'll continue to progress. So the big takeaway for me, Stephen, is that it's good to at least see proof that Ronald is healthy and active and obviously has made a lot of progress. But also the big takeaway is nothing has really changed. Once we get to the start of the season, probably we'll get more information, but it still seems like that early to mid-May makes sense as when to really expect Ronald to be back in good action.
Yeah, it was notable to me that he said that Ronald's not going to play in any spring training games. I don't know if we had that information before. I guess we kind of assumed. I thought he might get into a couple near the end, but Alex just went ahead and said he's not going to play in any spring training games. He might do stuff on the backfields and DH and stuff like that. So if you talk to Acuna, if you listen to Acuna talk, he is much more, I can play pretty soon. If you listen to Alex talk, they're going to be much, much more cautious about it. I think what they don't want is they don't want a situation like we got in 22 where he's back, but he's not really back. He's not Ronald Acuna Jr. He's kind of a shell of himself. And I think they're trying to avoid that this time around where they just give him more time. Obviously, this injury happened earlier in the calendar than the previous one. The first one he tore was in mid-July. This one was in May, late May. So he's already had a month and a half more to recover than he did last time. And so they're just going to take it very slow. And yeah, like you said, I think around the early May is going to be, if he's not going to play in any spring training games, then obviously he's going to have to ramp back up during April, in the minor leagues or wherever, extended spring training, wherever they want to do it. So yeah, early May looks like it's going to be the mark. But it was notable to me that he's not going to play in any spring training games. Alex just came right out and said it. There wasn't any, doubt. He didn't leave a question at the end of it. He just said, matter of factly, he's not going to play in any spring training games. And so that kind of takes some of the questions out of it when we see the lineups every day in spring training and Acuna's not in it. Now we know why. And maybe that's why he did it, to avoid the constant questions about it. And it just kind of settles it for the rest of spring. But yeah, early May looks like when he's going to be back. So hopefully we'll get more closer to the 2023 Ronald than the 2022 Ronald.
Absolutely. And that's another thing that, he discussed as well. And we will, when we talk more about, season previews and things such as that, we'll discuss what Ronald mentioned. But I will say that one thing that Ronald alluded to was that he feels he's in a much better place coming into this season than he was going into the 22 season. And it's not just because this is a second time experiencing things. Alex Anthopoulos himself said that Ronald was in a better position going into this year, much further ahead. So that, at the very least, is encouraging. That should, basically answer some questions in terms of what version of Ronald we're going to get when he comes back. Hopefully, once he returns, yes, you would expect, for a few weeks, even to a month or so, he needs to, get reallocated to the game that he loves. But maybe he'll be back to his normal self much quicker than what we saw in 2022.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, you know, we'll do a whole Ronald show a little bit later, but yeah, if he's back to normal, then I mean, that's everything for the Braves. I mean, he's just he got put on the MLB. I think they did like a top 100, and he got put like 16th on the list. And that's because of the injury, obviously. I mean, 2 years ago when he was healthy, he was the best player in baseball. So the Braves need the best player in baseball. And I said before when we were talking about Michael Harris that I'm not ready to give up on Acuna still being that guy, even though he's had two, full knee reconstructions. I still think that guy is in there. I don't think we'll see maybe the 70 stolen bases, but the bat is still very much a monster when he's healthy. So yeah, here's to it. And May can't get here fast enough because baseball is just more fun when Ronald's on the field.
I said reallocated. I think it's reacclimated. I don't know what the word is. Back to feeling like,
You're a Tennessee guy. You don't know what
yeah,
either
I know,
either,
I know.
either of those words mean either way.
That's why I say so many words. So if I say a word wrong by the 10th time that I've resaid what I've said over and over again, you'll get what I said. But the point that I'm getting at is that getting Ronald back to feeling like himself is what we're all waiting to see. But let's get into the main, into the meat of the conversation with Alex Anthopoulos. And that's the subject that many people have been waiting to hear straight from him all off season. The lack of moves, what has been out there. We've heard others, such as Justin Toscano, allude to the fact that, maybe the Braves were a bit more limited than they had thought at the beginning of the offseason as the offseason progressed. And Alex Anthopoulos, of course, he didn't come straight out and say it like he did earlier in the offseason when he kind of alluded to the fact that they could increase payroll. Stephen, there were several times in this interview on Friday where Alex again didn't directly talk about it, but you can take his comments and what he said, and it's pretty clear to me that a big takeaway from yesterday is that, yes, the Braves basically, while they're not going to allude to it, it does seem as if many of the questions that people have had about, where payroll is and are they a bit more limited, it seems like that there may be a bit more truth to that than we had initially anticipated at the beginning of the offseason. Is that the main takeaway as we, start to dissect the comments? Is that the main takeaway that you had from his comments yesterday?
So yesterday when he was talking, and if you missed the interview, it's all over social media. You can just type in Alex Anthopoulos interview yesterday, and there's actually video of it too, so you can go watch it if you want to. But while he was talking, he was talking up how big their payroll already is, how many contracts they already have on the books, and that is usually something that GMs say when they're trying to defend not making any more moves. And so a lot of people took away from it that they're not going to make any more moves. And it's very possible that they don't make any more moves. I did note when Alex said that Joe Jimenez was the one loss they haven't been able to account for yet. Part of me thinks that that's his way of saying they're still looking for a reliever. There's still quite a few players that haven't signed. There's still quite a few players that haven't been traded. I think the Braves could still make another move. I think the Braves need to make another move. You and I and Scott did that whole show about do they have enough pitching? And the answer to that question is always no. Even if you do have enough pitching, you don't have enough pitching. So I think the Braves should make more moves, specifically a reliever. I think reliever has jumped to the top of my list of what they need. I think you can talk yourself into Grant Holmes being able to replace Charlie Morton. Even if I don't necessarily believe that, I can understand where the Braves believe that, and I can see that argument. The bullpen is an argument I have a hard time buying at all. So But yeah, I was listening to those comments, and it was the first time I was like, okay, he's talking about what they've already spent in kind of a defensive manner. That's typically what you do when you're trying to convince people why you're not going to spend any more money. And so, yeah, yesterday was the first time I really thought, man, maybe they really are resetting the tax. And, you know, that's disappointing if I'm being 100% honest. And we try to be honest with fans. The year that they're hosting the All-Star game, the year after they had so many injuries, an offseason where they lost so much in free agency, the battery is packed every night. It is disappointing if they're cutting, payroll is about 20 million down from where it ended last year. And if they're really cutting payroll by that much, now again, Alex will spend money in season, so it won't end up being that much at the end. But that's disappointing. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I'm still going to hold out hope that there's another move in there somewhere. I just have a hard time believing this is the bullpen they're going to go. I know there are people that love Perdomo. I know there are people that love Pilar. I know there are people that love Daysbell. And I get that. But even with those three guys, there's another spot open in the bullpen. And it's much better if those guys are your, 6, 7, 8 versus your 5, 6, 7. I think they need another high leverage guy. Even just like a David Robertson signing or a trade for a decent reliever makes the offseason just look so much better. I'm going to hold out hope that that's what's going to happen. I still think that's what's going to happen. But I will say yesterday, and I want to get your opinion on this. Yesterday was the first time I thought to myself, wow, they maybe really are going to cut payroll and reset the tax. And I know there are going to be fans that are being like, yeah, we said that all along. And there have been people that have said that all along. But I couldn't believe it until I saw it. And we're not done yet. The season's still a month away. So, we're going to reserve judgment. But yesterday was the first time I thought to myself, wow, they really might do this.
I know people have in comments and things like that, they've really been wanting us to kind of rant, for lack of a better way of putting it. They've been wanting us to have that opportunity to really show our disappointment, and I agree. I'm disappointed as well. I referenced back about a month ago. We had this conversation where I still really did not feel that it was the case that payroll was having a big of an impact on the offseason that some may think, because it just didn't make sense for it to do that. Coming off 2 straight seasons, or excuse me, coming off last season, but also 2023, where you had so many injuries. Depth certainly is something that was a need. You've had both expected and unexpected needs pop up this offseason. You have the battery, which is a consistent opportunity of making money that that we feel has certainly helped them increase payroll over the past several years. You've got the All-Star game coming up. You're obviously in the midst of what you feel is a very clear window to try to win another championship. All those factors, to me, point to continuing to increase payroll. And Alex himself said it as well. But then yesterday, I didn't want to accept it. But yesterday, to your point, was kind of the first time where I'm like, okay, there's some truth to it, more than likely. And the biggest thing to me that stood out was, I know a lot of people took towards the end of the interview when Alex talked about, they have to be a bit more selective when it comes to how they spend their money. They took that as the big comment. The other big part of the comment was when he started off talking about the payroll, that they already had so many guys that they had invested in. A few years ago, it was clear the reason why they were doing this. They were trying to get long-term savings in place, long-term financial flexibility, to where those contracts weren't so elevated later on in this decade, to where they could still continue to add to the team. But yesterday, I'm not going to say it sounded like he regretted it, but it was more towards that. It was more like, well, we've already got so much invested in the team, and I know that some of these contracts are starting to elevate, but it looked like for the first time also, those long-term investments, with Alex's comments, he seemed to be referring to them more as a burden than a benefit in order to sit here and add to the team. And that really made me raise my eyebrows when it came to what to expect before the start of the season.
Well, I mean, Alex did this to himself. Like, 2 days after the season ended, he came out into a press conference and said into a microphone, he was just point blank asked, is payroll going up? And he said, yeah, it's going up. He didn't give any qualifiers. He didn't say, well, I got to find the right guys to pay. He didn't say, well, I haven't talked to Terry yet. I don't know what my number, there's all sort of things he could have said to quantify, to obfuscate, that answer. And he didn't do any of that. He just came out flat out and said, yeah, payroll's going up. And so when you say that, you obviously create the expectation among fans that payroll is going to go up. You can't tell everybody it's going to go up and then wonder why people are questioning why it hasn't gone up. You kind of made this bed yourself. And so, you know, I, I know there are going to be people that will defend Alex and defend the team. And listen, the Braves are a very good team. The Braves are probably going to win 90 plus games this year. So, we do want to make sure we don't want to get too crazy with this, but if the GM says payroll is going up and then payroll doesn't go up and in fact goes down, you open yourself up for criticism. I mean, that's just how it is. If I was advising Alex, I'd say next time somebody asks you that question 2 days after the season's over, don't give such an affirmative answer. Give a wishy-washy answer, give a word salad answer that doesn't mean anything, that doesn't tie you to anything. But when you just come and flat out and say payroll's going up and it doesn't go up and in fact goes down, you get what you get in terms of criticism. Like there's not really any defending that. So I understand why fans are mad. Listen, I completely get it. I am still holding out hope. I think they're going to make another move. I've said that. I know I've said that all offseason. I said that before the Profar signing. I still believe it. I think they're going to make another move. I think they're going to add a reliever. And then they'll obviously make moves in season to increase payroll as well. So I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet where I fully believe this is just the team. They're not adding anything else. Until we get to opening day and there's nobody else available, then we can have that conversation. I still think they're going to add. The comment about Joe Jimenez, when he was talking about Charlie Morton, he said, we believe that Grant Holmes can take that role. He didn't say Charlie Morton is a hole that we haven't filled yet. He said specifically, we think Grant Holmes can be what Charlie Morton is currently. So in their mind, obviously internally, they feel like Grant Holmes is the replacement for Charlie Morton. But when he got to Joe Jimenez, he didn't say that. He didn't say we think Daysbel Hernandez can be what Joe Jimenez was. He said maybe he can, hopefully he can. But what he started with is we haven't been able to account for that loss yet. So that tells me, and maybe I'm crazy, and if I'm wrong, I'll admit I'm wrong. And I know I've said this all season, but that tells me they're still working on something. I think they're still trying to add a reliever. And until we get to the end of spring training, which is the official end of the offseason, I'm going to believe that they're still trying to add a reliever. And, if they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. We'll obviously talk about it either way. But I'm not there yet where I'm fully convinced this is the team, this is the payroll, going into the season.
And I want to clarify on my end that I'm not to the point to where I don't feel like they're going to add. I'm basically saying that, them taking care of every hole with a significant addition. I never really expected for that to be the case, but I'm more saying that going into the season, I think there's going to be more questions out there than many of us had hoped there would be remaining as we go into the season, if that makes sense. And I'm also not trying to defend Alex, but when you take what he said at the beginning of the season, and yesterday, when you kind of look, further into his comments, he looked like he wasn't necessarily scrambling, but he was basically just trying. He didn't seem convinced himself that the reasons is for the lack of moves this offseason, the reasons that didn't occur. He didn't really seem to believe in the words that he was saying. And I'm not sitting here trying to, overly criticize Alex. But the point that I'm getting at is I wonder if something has happened. Like at the time that Alex made the comments right after the season, to now, did something occur as the offseason progressed where the Braves' ability to add was more limited than they thought? I don't have the answers to that. I'm not sitting here again trying to say this is the reason why not to criticize Alex. To your point, he should have probably not been so direct at the beginning of the offseason. But I wonder as the offseason has progressed, the Braves just realized they just didn't have the ability to add as they thought. That's something else that kind of came to mind yesterday. It just seems like as the offseason progressed, the Braves did not have as much room to add as they thought. So now going into the season, they're really focused on what they've got to work with to maybe fill some of these needs internally, fill more of these needs internally than they had originally thought to start the offseason.
Well, yeah, and the offseason started with a bunch of cost-saving moves. Remember, I mean, they declined Darno's option, which was very controversial. I mean, Darno is a beloved player in Atlanta. He was he was one of their best hitters last year when Murphy was so bad. And it was a very reasonable option. It was like $8 million option, and they declined it. And they restructured Ronaldo Lopez's deal. They restructured Aaron Bummer's deal. They moved on from Soler, saved a bunch of money there. They non-tendered Laureano. They non-tendered Griffin Canning, who was the return for Soler. So they did all these moves at the beginning of the offseason, and the way they sold it was, we are not cutting payroll. We are giving ourselves as much room so we can go out and be aggressive in the market, right? That's how they sold it. And so naturally, when you're not aggressive in the market after that, people are going to ask questions like, why downgrade from Travis Darno to Chadwick Trump if you're not going to use those savings anywhere else on the team? It just looks like you just got worse at catcher just to save money. And listen, that's fair. That's a fair criticism. And it doesn't mean the team's not good. The team's fantastic. And I actually kind of like having Shawn Murphy being able to play more now that he has a traditional backup. But like, if you spin it as we're doing these cost saving moves so that we have ammunition to go add to the team during the winter, and then you do very little in the winter, people are going to ask questions. And, Alex knows that. He's been in this business long enough. And again, when you tie that also to the fact that you said payroll is going up and it doesn't go up, people are going to get mad. And so again, I'm not ready to say this is the team yet. I don't think this is the team. I think they're going to add another reliever between now and opening day. And I think payroll is going to go up, and then they'll do stuff in season and payroll is going to go up more. I don't know what the final number will be, but listening to him talk about Joe Jimenez yesterday made me even more believe that they know they need another reliever, and we'll see. It has to match up. I think they were in on Tanner Scott, and I think the Dodgers outbid him. I think they were in on Jeff Hoffman, and they didn't like his shoulder. If they sign either one of those contracts, payroll looks a lot different. This is a different conversation. So I don't know if their ability to sign free agents has diminished, or they just never got to the finish line on the ones they liked. And that's fair. Like that, if you try to sign a guy and he doesn't sign because the Dodgers paid him more money, or he doesn't sign because you don't like the medicals, like, I get that. That happens. So, and at the end of the day, people are just going to judge you based on what you get done. And Alex knows that. And I think that's why he was in a bit of a defensive posture yesterday, quite honestly, is that he knows he's going to catch criticism. And I think he knows it's a bit of his own fault for saying unequivocally that payroll was going to go up in November. I think if he could have that press conference back, he would have been a little more, conservative in his answers versus just being so emphatic in his answers. Because that looking back at that whole press conference, I mean, when he talked about all the coaches were going to come back, they fired 3 coaches like a week later. He talked about all the guys with options are going to get picked up. They declined Darno's options. He said payroll is going to go up. Looks like payroll is going to go down. Like, that whole press conference is kind of comical now when you go back and listen to it. But I'm guessing if he had it to do over again, he would maybe be a little more conservative in his answers, back in November.
And then the last thing that I'll end with is that, okay, so, again, coming back to the perspective of questions and answers, right? Plenty of questions have been there throughout the offseason. More of those questions than we thought are still unanswered as we go into spring training. But I want to broaden the scope of these questions a bit more, because now, as we've seen this payroll occur, we've seen Alex Anthopoulos' comments occur. We've got some big contracts that are in the final year of their contract. We got some big payroll guys in the final year of their contract. This starts to shed light on the fact, okay, do we fill them with significant contributors? Dansby Swanson left before the start of the 2023 season. Now, I'm not saying we should have paid him $175 million, but we obviously have stayed focused on filling him with the cheap option in Orlando Arcia. Max Fried and Charlie Morton both have left. I know you can sit there and say, well, Spencer Swellenbach and Chris Sale are the replacements for them. I don't think that's true. We have not gone out and added another significant arm when we have the need. What occurs with Raisel Iglesias, who's owed $16 million this year, and Marcelo Zuna, who's owed $16 million this year? If they have good years, they potentially could get in the $20 million range each for both of them. What if after this season, they obviously leave in free agency, and now we've got other significant holes to fill? The ability for this team to be able to fill significant holes as we start to lose more and more players to free agents, which we've really seen happen this offseason, our ability to replace that value now doesn't become as certain. And that to me is the big long term question that comes from Alex Anthopoulos' comments yesterday.
Yeah, listen, that's fair. I mean, they obviously lost a lot this offseason to free agency. And like you said, they've got their two big guns next year coming off the books are Iglesias and Ozuna on top of some other smaller stuff. Are they going to replace those guys? We've watched, you know, Freddie Freeman leave. We watched Dansby Swanson leave. We watched Max Fried, Charlie Morton, AJ Minter. The Braves have watched a lot of really good guys leave. And it's a fair question to ask, are they going to replace him? Because they didn't really replace him this offseason, at least not in the marketplace. Now, they will tell you that, Spencer Strider coming back is kind of the replacement for Max Fried, and Grant Holmes' emergence is kind of the replacement for Charlie Morton, and Angel Perdomo is the replacement for AJ Minter. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding on that. If Grant Holmes goes out and throws an incredible year and he's like a legitimate starting pitcher, then that opinion is a lot more valid, right? If Angel Perdomo comes out and shows that he can be a really good reliever, that validates that opinion, that validates that move. So the proof will be in the pudding in a lot of ways. We'll learn a lot this year, but it's fair to ask after this offseason, are they cutting, is this a 1-year thing of just resetting the tax? Are they winding back payroll overall? Is this kind of the new level that they're going to be at? And that means they're not going to be able to replace the guys that leave next year? I don't know. That's a fair question. This offseason has gone very different than I thought it would. I think it's gone very different than a lot of people thought it would. I'll say it again. I'm not convinced the offseason is necessarily over yet. And until some guys come off the board and go somewhere else, I still think the Braves are looking to maybe add. But there's no doubt this offseason has gone very different than people thought it would. And the Braves are banking on some guys internally stepping up and filling roles that they've never filled before. And if that works and people stay healthy, then Alex will get a lot of credit. And if it doesn't, then Alex is going to catch a lot of shit. And that's just that's the name of it. When you have a quiet offseason and things work, then no one cares. If you have a quiet offseason and things don't work, everybody cares. So, in a lot of ways, the play on the field will determine the final opinion on this offseason.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to the thing about certainty versus uncertainty, right? We were coming off 2024, the performance of the offseason. We're a lot more uncertain going into this season than we were a year ago. 2 straight years where we've had to deal with significant injury problems, and this time around to our who was our most valuable pitcher, who is our most valuable pitcher, and our most valuable position player in terms of what they've done in recent years in Ronald Acuna Jr. and Spencer Strider. That's uncertainty. Now we have, payroll, what's there in terms of payroll. And we've lost so many sources of certainty, right? Max Fried was reliable as a starter as you could be as a top of the rotation starter. Charlie Morton was as reliable as you could be taking the ball every 5th day. AJ Minter from the left side being a back end of the bullpen option was as reliable as you could be most years. But now we've had those become holes to fill. And what are we filling them with? Sources of uncertainty. So I think that that's the other thing that stands out is that if we had, more, guys, more internal options like higher prospects that we knew more about and things such as that were filling these holes, that may be the case. But I think that also we're just seeing a stretch of uncertainty that is continuing to rise with this team. And while the known sources of success and production we know are very good, we also know that they are not as reliable as they once were to stay healthy. I don't mean that as a criticism. It's just the simple truth. So the depth behind those options being more uncertain than it has ever been before, again, I definitely feel that anybody who, wants to criticize, that's fine. But if you don't feel as confident that this team going into this season, while the talent level is there, is going to be able to have the consistent production, health, what it may be, to really get to the expectations that many of us have, I don't blame you for feeling uncertain yourself that they're going to be able to rise to the occasion and get the job done. I still think this team should be World Series or bust. I definitely think the World Series is a reasonable outcome. But again, there's just a lot more questions at this point in time of the offseason that are still relevant than I thought there would be a few months ago.
And that's what it is, really. Our expectation was we would have more answers at this point than we have, right? And that's where people are upset. Or not upset, but confused. Like, we just thought we'd have more answers. And right now, we're going to go into the season, it looks like, with a lot of questions. That doesn't mean it's going to be bad. Like, most of those questions could be answered. Like, Spencer Strider could really just be back and back to Cy Young level Spencer Strider. Ronald Acuna could just be back. I do think the offense will be better next year than it was last year. I don't think they're going to have to pitch as well as they did last year to win. I mean, last year they won a lot of games like 2-1, 3-1, because the offense wasn't doing anything. I don't think that's going to be the case again this year. I do think the pitching staff as a whole can take a step back and the results not be any worse because the offense is going to be better. I think Profar is a big addition. I think he helps in a lot of ways. And I think, Olsen will be better. I think Riley will be better. I think Ozzie will be better. I think Murphy will be better. Acuna's just a wild card at this point. We'll see what happens. But the pitching staff shouldn't have to be as good this year as it was last year. I could be wrong about that, but I think the offense will carry more of the load this year than it did last year. And we'll see. Most of the questions of this team are around the pitching staff. We'll see. We'll see what Grant Holmes looks like. The schedule early on is very tough. They go to San Diego, to LA, the first 2 series of the year. They come home, they play the Marlins and the Phillies. So they play basically 3 of the 4 best teams in the National League, in their first 4 series. And they're not going to have Strider or Acuna. So we'll learn pretty early what this team looks like. Spring training is going to be fascinating for guys like Ian Anderson and Grant Holmes just to see how they look. Same thing with guys like Perdomo and Pilar. If they don't add another reliever, these guys all of a sudden become critically important. So, one good thing about a lot of questions is it does lead to a lot of intrigue. Like, there will be things to talk about this spring because we don't have a lot of answers to some, the questions that we started the offseason with. We don't have a lot of answers. So, that does lead to at least some entertaining, topics for spring training. But I think the offense will be better. I still think they're going to get another reliever, and this is still a very good team. And I know people are upset with Alex right now because of the payroll stuff, but this is a very good team. And I still think they're trying to add. And we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and the other thing, that the best way I could sum it up is that I think myself, you, Steven, and many, when you look at this team on paper going into spring training the past 3 seasons and right before the season started, you look at them on paper and you say to yourself, wow, this team legitimately has a case to be the best team in baseball. So far this spring training or going into the start of spring training this year, when you look at this team on paper, you still say wow for the same reason, but you also see yourself saying wow a second time where you're like, hey, there are a bit more questions on here than I had originally thought. So I think that's a good way to sum it up. But here's the thing that I'll say is this. Just because there's more questions, that does not mean that they won't wind up having positive answers once we get into the season. And I will say this, I will defend Alex all day long on this. Typically, when he has questions to answer when it comes to putting the product on the field, more often than not, his track record shows he answers with a quality response. So if we're going to bank on that, I'll continue to bank on it, even if we may not have as much to bank with as we once thought. Steven, any more comments from you as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
No, I'm just happy baseball's back.
Yeah.
We're actually going to get, technically the position players report Monday, of course, for the Braves. Most of them are already there anyways, but then we're going to get full squad workouts and then we're going to get into games. I get their spring training games. They don't mean a ton, but again, like we just talked about here, the Braves are going to have some things that they need to see in spring training. They're going to have bullpen spots open. They're going to have back of the rotation spots open, especially since Strider's not going to be there to start the year. They're going to have 2 rotation spots that they're going to have to fill internally. So how these guys look in spring is going to matter. Same thing with the bullpen guys, how they look. They brought in an army of minor league free agents. So, spring training is going to have some interest, and, we'll be able to see it and talk about it. They're showing a lot more spring training games. We're actually going to get video of it more this year. You can stream games a lot more often in spring training than you used to be able to. So I'm excited. I do. I would love for the Braves to get one more reliever. I'd feel so much better with one more reliever, but we'll see what they do. But baseball is back. March Madness is almost here. Best time of the year for a sports fan. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I definitely am as well. And hey, you know what? Again, the other good thing about it is that if it's been a disappointing off season for you, if now we have more, more certain truth than ever that hey, a lot of the questions that we have are going to be answered internally by the talent that's already on the team. Replace that disappointment from the offseason, as Steven mentioned, with intrigue for spring training. Because if the answers are going to reveal themselves on spring training, that just allows for us to enjoy it more, and thus we'll also be able to talk about it, enjoy it, and have some fun. So because baseball is back. For Stephen Tolbert, you can find him at _outliers. My name is Shawn Coleman. You can find me at StatsSAC. Find us on X, Twitter, find Hammer Territory across all forms of social media, and also part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. I've got the Braves hat on this time, but we will be with you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us. Go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.